Think about the last time you saw a behaviour that stood out to you. Maybe a child flapping their hands, somebody repeating a phrase over and over, or a person refusing to follow an instruction. Did you immediately see that behaviour as a problem to be fixed? Now, for years, behaviourist models have taught us to modify behaviours, reward the good, discourage the bad. But what if we told you that some of what we call challenge behaviour is actually an individual's way of coping, communicating, or self-regulating? What if the real issue isn't the behaviour itself, but how we respond to it? In today's episode, we're exploring the difference between adaptive and maladaptive behaviours, why it's crucial to shift away from outdated, rigid behaviourist approaches, and how we can become more person-centred, neurodiverse accepting, and trauma-aware in our approach to behaviour support. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome to the Able to Care podcast, a place where we have real conversations about caregiving, behaviour support and person-centred practice. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're talking about something that is often misunderstood in traditional behaviour management, the difference between adaptive and maladaptive. I'd also say the difference between maladaptive and just disliked. So for too long, many approaches, especially those rooted in behaviourist models, have focused on controlling behaviours rather than understanding them. These models often encourage compliance over autonomy, sometimes at the expense of a person's emotional well-being and self-identity. But we're going to flip that today. So we're going to be looking at the difference between adaptive and maladaptive and then other interpretations, why some behaviours aren't actually a problem, the risk of focusing on behaviour modification instead of support, and how person-centred, neurodiverse-affirming approach leads to better outcomes for all. I often use a term. There's loads of language out there that some people who've listened to podcasts for a while will be aware that, I've referred to as far as challenging behaviour or behaviour that challenges, behaviours of concern, hazardous behaviour, distressed behaviour. There's loads of different kind of language out there. I quite like the term kind of adaptive and maladaptive, but I put it into this way. So I often use numerous terms related to behaviour that challenges. And there's loads of different language out there. So other people who've watched some of my podcasts may be aware of, we've had discussions about the terms challenge behaviour, behaviour of concern, hazardous behaviour, behaviour that challenges, lots of different language out there. But I quite like using the principles or the language of adaptive versus maladaptive, as long as we frame them in the right way. So here's my definition for adaptive behaviour. Adaptive behaviour is behaviour a person uses to either meet their needs or to cope with stress that is usually perceived as beneficial for their well-being and potentially accepted by society. On the flip side, we've got the maladaptive behaviour, which are either behaviours that meet a need or cope with stress that the person finds or could be detrimental for the person's well-being or viewed as negative by society. They're the usual definitions. The important bit is how they're perceived by society. I've done videos before on what's classed as deficit behaviours, and things like eye contact and hand flapping or certain self-stimulating behaviours, for instance, sometimes have been perceived as negative. Well, we need to stop them. We need to make this person engage in eye contact. We need to stop them from stimming. But as I've used the example before, Once upon a time, we used to punish left-handed people and make them use their right hand. But now we recognize that that's barbaric and inappropriate, not justified, that somebody can write just as well with their right hand as they can their left hand, that it makes no difference to their outcomes. It's just a case of a personal preference from other people of whether they think that's okay or not. And most of us are now accepting that there's nothing wrong with left-handedness. And society has changed again when it comes to many behaviors of those with neurodifferences. That just because we don't necessarily do that or engage in it or necessarily understand it doesn't mean it's wrong. And eye contact's a prime example of that, going, well, maybe actually eye contact isn't a maladaptive behavior. It's an adaptive behavior. By not engaging eye contact, that allows me to listen better because I'm not so overwhelmed from the sensory input that's coming in. That's a different way. And this is why it's so important to be person-centered, of understanding those two labels of adaptive and maladaptive. So you should always really come back to one is detrimental to the person's well-being and one is beneficial for the person's well-being. But that's us really understanding the function of behavior. So let's say that not engaging eye contact, we could say, is adaptive way of coping with sensory difficulties, but maybe banging their head is maladaptive. Not for any judgment other than they could really hurt themselves and cause themselves long-term head injury, concussion problems, even increase the risk of dementias due to banging their head. So therefore, this may be something that we need to help them to overcome, to change, or give them other ways of meeting those needs. Once we discover the need or the stressor, we can then understand what strategy or why that strategy rather than the other. And if we do decide it's maladaptive, is what skills this person need to do it themselves, to manage it better. So if we put in the strategy or the category of maladaptive, things like aggression towards others or self-injury, or sometimes extreme withdrawal as well, because we are social species and therefore extreme withdrawal, not engaging, could actually be detrimental for their long-term outcomes. That doesn't mean that if somebody chooses to step away from a situation or enjoys time by themselves, then we should take that choice away from them. So often the behavior itself is not the issue. It's our perception of the behavior. A good example is I get people to write down a list of behaviors that they find challenging at the beginning of a course. And we explore and kind of go, some of those are based on personal values and attitudes rather than actually detrimental. We can understand that physical aggression towards others is not okay, but it's definitely picking our battles. So swearing, I always think, is a good example of this. Some people might find swearing highly offensive. They don't like it in their environment. They don't like working with it. They don't want to support somebody who's using that kind of language. Swearing upsets them. Whereas another person might be, it's just words. Straight over my head. Doesn't bother me. It doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. That's just what you find challenging. That doesn't mean that then we need to really explore our own attitudes, going, well, just because I don't like swearing, but they do, why do I get a right to then take that away from them? How can I dictate that shouldn't happen? Now, in certain environments, we might say, okay, like school, okay, that's something we need to manage. We can't have all the children swearing. It's, deemed as inappropriate societally. It may be detrimental to them as far as getting jobs and working and things like that. But we need to explore it. We need to explore our values for it. The problem is, let's say I've had an individual with the rare form of Tourette's that involves swearing. And it is a rare form, by the way. We couldn't label it as their challenge behavior. We might still find it challenging. We may have to manage it in some ways, but we're never going to change it. So we need to change the way we feel about it, change the way it's managed, rather than change the behavior itself, because that's just who that person is. And that's what we should be looking at all the time, of a cost-benefit analysis, not just for us, but for them. Actually trying to stop somebody from expressing their tics might be actually really detrimental to their mental health and their well-being. But I may need to manage it so much as I actually need to manage the attitudes and the reactions of other people rather than the behavior of the person themselves. So I've still got behavior to manage, but it's not the individual, it's others. It may be other staff members, it may be other children, to kind of go, hey, there's no picking on this, there's no bullying this. We have to allow that person to be themselves. The problem with risking, or the risk of focusing on behavior modification instead of support, is that many traditional behaviorist models rely on rewards and punishments to shape behavior, but this doesn't address why the behavior is happening. And this can cause long-term emotional suffering and challenges. there's a famous program which was called How to Train Your Child Like a Dog using behaviorist models. It can work. The problem is it doesn't take any of the emotional connections, the high level of emotions and complexity we have as humans as far as related thoughts. Also, it just doesn't work in the same way for everybody. We have these overly simplistic ways of applying behaviorist models of going, well, because you did that wrong on a Tuesday, you're going to get punished on Saturday. But if they don't connect the dots, then they're not learning anything. They're just experiencing a reduced quality of life and shame and reduced self-esteem and confusion, and sense of justice may actually be triggered as a result and trigger further behaviors rather than reducing them. Compliance isn't always a good thing. I don't want a child to use good manners just because they're scared not to. I want them to use good manners because they see the social benefits of it, if they can, how it can actually benefit others and be nicer, and they'll make more friends from it and other people appreciate it, rather than just because they have to. There's a lot we now understand. So boundaries is a huge thing that we talk about within society now, that we're recognizing that so many people are people pleasers. I wonder where this came from, because it's been conditioned that you should please others, that you'll get punished if you don't, you'll get rewarded if you do. But then that creates all sorts of problems that sometimes we lead to social burnout, or our social batteries are a struggle, or we then cause disconnection and mental health problems as a result of that. All this is leading back to these old behaviorist kind of approaches and mentalities. Suppressing behaviors without addressing the root cause can actually lead to increased anxiety and distress, a person losing their natural coping strategies and learn helplessness, or a person gives up advocating for their needs because there's no point in trying. I always mess up. Nobody listens to me anyway. Nobody can help me. So what's the point in trying? So instead of teaching compliance, we always need to support autonomy and emotional well-being. We need to be very, very mindful of our own attitudes, beliefs, and values, and do a proper identification, an analysis of where's this coming from? Is this affecting this person's health, safety, and welfare? Other people's health, safety, and welfare? Their social inclusion, their level of care? Or is it the fact that I just don't like it and I don't agree with it? And if it falls into that second category, it's actually probably not their challenge behavior. It might actually be yours. So instead of looking at just changing behaviors, our aim is always to understand. So I have a rule that we start with in my 6-stage target model. When we're looking at identification, there's 2 types of behaviors I want to identify. I want to identify adaptive behaviors that the person is already using, that I want to reinforce, I want to encourage, I want to help them and support them to master these skills further. But I also want to identify any maladaptive behaviors that I need to understand. Well, why are they using that maladaptive behavior? Why are they using that rather than any other? Is it actually adaptive and it's just done based on my values? Or is it because they don't know any other way and they need to learn additional skills to better cope or to better manage? So instead of going, how do we stop this? What does this mean for the person? What's wrong for them? How are they feeling? We respect self-regulation. So there is a thing called safe hands. Now, safe hands isn't about stopping an individual from self-stimulating or from hand flapping or just from regulating themselves. You know, I had a lad in my household who used to jump to help him to cope with emotional dysregulation and sensory overload. You wouldn't mind him doing that. I was sitting with a lad the other day and he was kind of stimming. I said, you enjoy yourself, mate. You stim away. You feeling good? And he was just he was enjoying that stimming. I don't care if other people are looking and judging. That's none of their opinion is not my concern, or is none of my business what they think. The same as it's none of their business really what he's doing. But he was happy. So I encouraged it because he was okay. He was happy and self-regulating with that. Recognize that every person is different. We all value diversity. We all think that being able to think differently and act differently for your own personal sense of well-being is right. You know, if I want to wear odd socks and everybody else wants to comply with the same color socks, well, that's okay. That's just me being an individual. The problem is when we come across something just too different, it steps out of what our values and our expectations are. That's why we tend to really struggle and we feel we need to change it to fit in with what we think is right and wrong. You need to be very, very self-reflective when it comes to those kind of attitudes. We also want to encourage and reinforce emotional well-being rather than just compliance. If a behavior is meeting a need in a non-harmful way, well, then let it be. But if it's in a harmful way, then we need to teach them a better way of meeting it. rather than just telling them to stop or trying to punish them for doing it. We also should encourage the individuals themselves in their own support, giving them autonomy. Now, certain things like, if we take self-harm as an example, like we may say, okay, that's detrimental. I do say that, we need to be mindful again of as far as we're looking at it from one lens. We need to look at it. There must be a benefit. One thing I try and get over with all behaviors, every behavior you encounter must have a benefit to it. We tend to see the cost, but we always need to analyze it to try and view what the benefit is. If there was no benefit whatsoever, they wouldn't be doing it. And by understanding the benefit, then we can really start to understand the function of the behavior and how can we help them to gain that benefit in other ways that may be better outcomes for them, may improve their well-being, but not just because it complies with social norms, but because it actually is more beneficial for them. Just to kind of summarize, not all behaviors that we class as challenging are actually maladaptive. Some are actually essential coping skills, or they're just part of who that person is, and it's none of your business. Suppressing behaviors without addressing what their function is can actually cause more harm than good. It can cause mental health problems. It can cause frustration. It can cause learned helplessness. Old traditional behaviorist models often focus on compliance rather than connection and person-centered focus. And we should be looking at a neurodiverse-affirming approach. We have now become more accepting that people are different. Yes, we have to have some form of cohesive society to some degree, but we also need to recognize that eye contact is a cultural norm. Hand flapping may seem odd to you, but who are you to judge? I sometimes like to dance in my home on my own. If anybody was watching, they'd probably think me crazy. Rather than just focusing on fitting what we think is a neurotypical mold. If you're a caregiver, teacher, or professional, take a step back today and observe behavior through a new lens. Look at it in a non-judgmental way. Instead of asking, how do I stop this? Try asking, what does this behavior tell me about this person? I need to learn about them, understand more about them. Connection before any solution. I really want people out there to recognize that not all behavioral models or focuses on behavioral change are built on old behaviorist mentalities. I encounter a lot of negativity around that. And although there may be certain behaviorist elements to anything, like, I will reward myself if I do something good as a way of kind of encouraging myself to do that. So behaviorism isn't completely bad and completely wrong if it's put through a person-centered and a non-prejudicial lens, that we're doing it with the collaboration of the person to meet their best outcomes of a good quality of life, to achieve and mastery and achievements in whatever they want to achieve. And that should be our true aim, to get the best positive outcomes for all. If you found anything on today's podcast useful, helpful, please like, comment, and share. Also subscribe to our channel so that you can hear more of what we do. Thank you. Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature, and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict, and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience, and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities, or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation, and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today.